Some men spend a lifetime learning how to win. It only takes one moment of arrogance to lose something they never knew they needed. At a glittering charity gala in downtown Chicago, Blake Harrison, a man who had never once been told he was wrong, opened his mouth and destroyed something precious before it ever had a chance to exist. Hannah Whitmore heard every word, and she walked away without giving him a single glance. But the real story isn't about the insult. It's about what happened after. Drop a like and comment the city you're watching from. I want to see how far this story has traveled. Betty. The ballroom on the 42nd floor of the Aldrich Grand Hotel smelled like money and fresh roses, and Hannah Whitmore had learned a long time ago that those two smells together meant trouble. Not trouble for her specifically. Trouble in the abstract sense, the kind that comes from putting 500 wealthy people into a room with open bars, string quartets, and the particular brand of self-congratulation that passes for charity work among Chicago's elite. Someone would drink too much. Someone would say the wrong thing to the wrong wife. Someone would corner a caterer near the kitchen doors and complain about the temperature of the salmon. Hannah had planned enough of these events to know exactly how the night would unspool, and she moved through the ballroom like she had rehearsed it in her sleep. Because she had. She adjusted the height of a centerpiece near table 7, a towering arrangement of white peonies and eucalyptus that had tilted 2 degrees to the left sometime in the last 20 minutes. The flowers cooperated. She straightened the linen on the adjacent chair where someone had sat briefly and wrinkled it while talking on their phone. She flagged down Marcus, her head server, with 2 fingers and tilted her chin toward the far corner where a champagne flute had been left on the edge of a windowsill, one small vibration from disaster. Marcus nodded and moved without breaking stride. This was the thing nobody understood about event planning. It wasn't glamorous. It wasn't creative. Not at the moment of execution. By the time a night like this arrived, all the creativity was done. The centerpieces had been chosen, the menus finalized, the lighting calibrated to flattering amber tones that cost 3 times what the standard package included. By the time Hannah walked into that ballroom at 6:15 in the evening wearing her black coordinating set, neat, professional, invisible in the way she needed to be, her job had become something closer to a surgeon's. Quiet, precise. 1,000 small corrections that nobody would ever notice because they weren't supposed to notice. She wore her hair up tonight. Her warm blonde curls were pinned back with the same tortoiseshell clip she used at every event, not because she didn't know nicer things, but because pinned back meant they stayed out of her face, and her face needed to be unobstructed. She needed to see everything. Hannah Whitmore was 29 years old, and she had been building Whitmore events for 4 years with almost no financial cushion and almost no margin for error. And she had learned early on that the difference between a successful event and a ruined one was almost always something small. A wrong temperature. A late delivery. A florist who swore on their professional reputation that the orchids would arrive by 5. The orchids had not arrived by 5 tonight. They had arrived at 6:58, which was 2 minutes before the first guest came through the doors, and Hannah had restaged the entire south wall floral arrangement in 12 minutes while wearing heels and responding to 3 separate text messages from her assistant, Priya, who was managing the caterer's breakdown about the gluten-free appetizers being plated on the wrong trays. She had handled it. She always handled it. That wasn't pride talking. It was simply the accumulation of 4 years of proof. By 9 o'clock, the Hartley Foundation's annual charity gala was running so smoothly that Claudia Hartley, the foundation's 72-year-old director, a woman who had been hosting these events for 20 years and had opinions about everything from table linens to the precise decibel level of the string quartet, had found Hannah near the service corridor and pressed both her hands and said, "Hannah, this is the best it's ever been." Those were the words. Hannah had stored them in the same internal place where she kept all the good things people said to her, a place she returned to on the bad nights when nothing was going right and the doubt crept in like water under a door. She was thinking about that, about how to keep those words accessible when she needed them, when she heard the voices on the other side of the flower arrangement near the east wall. She hadn't been eavesdropping. She never eavesdropped. She had been checking the arrangement for the 3rd time that evening, specifically to verify that the low LED uplighting was still hitting the white peonies at the angle she'd specified, because the light had been drifting warm all night, and warm light on white flowers made them look yellow on camera, and the Hartley Foundation's photographer was shooting constantly. The two men on the other side of the arrangement didn't know she was there. She didn't recognize the first voice immediately. Low, authoritative, the kind of voice that had spent years in boardrooms being agreed with. The Hartley woman seems pleased with the setup. She should be. A second voice, lighter, also male, friendly from the sound of it. The planner they brought in is apparently excellent. A pause, the clink of glasses. Planner. The first voice again, and in that single word there was something Hannah couldn't quite name yet. A specific quality. Not derision exactly, something more casual than derision, something worse. I saw her moving around earlier, not exactly the image you'd want representing an event like this. Blake. I'm just saying what every person in this room is thinking. She's a distraction, not the kind of woman any powerful man would choose to have representing his business. Hannah's hands stilled on the flower stems. The second man, the one named Blake, continued in the same even conversational tone, the way a person discusses the weather or a mediocre restaurant recommendation. There was no heat in his voice, no awareness that what he was saying was anything other than a perfectly reasonable observation. First impressions are everything in this industry. You understand that better than anyone, Ethan. The woman who plans your event is part of your brand. And a plus-size woman moving through a room like this one, it sends a message, not the right one. Silence on the other side of the arrangement. Then the second voice, Ethan, said carefully and without much conviction, "That's a significant thing to say about someone you've never spoken to." "I don't need to speak to her, I can see her." Hannah did not move. She was aware of her own breathing. She was aware of the weight of the tortoiseshell clip in her hair and the slight pressure of her heels on the parquet floor and the cool stems of the peonies under her fingertips. She was aware of her heartbeat, which had not accelerated, which was itself a kind of information she stored somewhere. She did not move out from behind the arrangement. She did not say anything. She did not allow herself to have a visible reaction to words that had been spoken about her body, her appearance, her professional worth, by a man who did not know her name. She adjusted the last flower. She stepped back from the arrangement. She walked. She did not hurry. She did not flee. She moved at the same measured pace she always moved at, across the ballroom floor toward the service corridor where Marcus was waiting with a question about the dessert course timing. She did not look toward the east wall. She answered Marcus's question about the dessert course. She checked her phone. A message from Priya. "Client happy? Photographer happy? Are you good?" She typed back, "All good. Dessert in 20. She put her phone back in her pocket. And then she stood in the service corridor for exactly 4 seconds, alone, and allowed herself to feel it. The specific, nauseating sensation of being reduced. Of having everything she had built, and every skill she had developed, and every long night, and every near disaster, and every piece of herself she had poured into this work, condensed down to the circumference of her body, by a man whose champagne glass probably cost more than her first car. 4 seconds. Then she went back out into the ballroom and finished her job. The man on the other side of the arrangement was Blake Harrison, and Ethan Caldwell, who had been standing beside him, had watched Blake say those words with the particular discomfort of someone who has known a person long enough to recognize their worst impulses without yet knowing how to stop them. Ethan and Blake had been friends since their first year at Northwestern, which was now 15 years ago. And in 15 years of friendship, Ethan had watched Blake develop an almost pathological precision when it came to the people he chose to let into his orbit. Blake Harrison did not make room for anyone who didn't serve a specific function. He was not cruel about it, or he didn't think of himself as cruel. He was, in his own mind, simply efficient. He had built Harrison Capital from a 2-person consultancy into a financial entity that managed over $9 billion in private equity, and he had done it by being right about people, by reading rooms, by understanding, at a molecular level, what made something valuable or a liability. The problem was that he applied the same framework to human beings. Ethan had watched him do it for 15 years, and he had rarely said anything about it, because Blake was not wrong about most things. And when you watch someone be right again and again and again, you start to defer to their judgment even when something in your stomach says to push back. But tonight, standing with his glass of Barolo near the east wall, while Blake said those things about the woman with the curly blonde hair and the tortoiseshell clip, who had been moving through this event with a quiet, focused competence that Ethan had found himself watching for the better part of an hour. Tonight, Ethan's stomach said something different. He told Blake it was a significant thing to say about someone he'd never spoken to. Blake shrugged it off. Ethan let it go. He always let it go. But then something made him turn. And when he turned, he saw the woman, the event planner, the one Blake had just categorized and filed away without interest, step back from the flower arrangement on the east wall. She was close enough that there was no question she had heard. She showed nothing, not a flinch, not a tightening around the eyes, not the particular way a person's jaw shifts when they're swallowing something they'd rather say out loud. She adjusted the last flower with the same careful attention she'd been giving it before the words reached her, and then she walked across the ballroom in a straight, unhurried line and disappeared into the service corridor. Ethan stood there for a long moment, holding his wine. Blake had turned to greet someone else, already moving on, already operating in the efficient current of his own attention. Ethan watched the door of the service corridor. He kept watching it. He wasn't sure what he was waiting for. Some sign of the cost she'd absorbed, maybe. Some tell. But nothing came. A few minutes later, she reappeared, said something brief to a tall server near the door, checked her phone, put it away, and continued her circuit of the room. Ethan thought that required something. He didn't say it out loud. He just stood there, holding his wine and thinking about a woman he didn't know, who had just demonstrated more composure under an unprovoked indignity than Ethan had shown in any of the several moderately difficult situations he had faced in his adult life. The gala ended at 11:30. By midnight, the catering team was breaking down tables, and Hannah was doing her final walkthrough with Claudia Hartley, who moved through the ballroom slowly on account of her hip and pointed at things with the quiet authority of someone who had spent decades getting exactly what she wanted. The dessert course was too slow, Claudia said, not unkindly. 20 minutes between the main and the sweets. People were restless. Yes, Hannah said. I flagged it at the setup. The pastry chef runs behind. I'll build it into the contract next time. Claudia looked at her sideways. Next time? You sound confident. You said it was the best one you've ever done. Claudia made a sound that was almost a laugh. I did say that. So yes, I'm confident. Claudia's mouth curved. She patted Hannah's arm once, the way older women do when they're trying not to be too obvious about being impressed. I'll call you Monday about the spring gala. Hannah drove home at 12:45 in her 10-year-old Civic with the heating system that worked perfectly and the air conditioning that mostly didn't, and she turned the radio off because she needed the quiet. She thought about what Blake Harrison had said. She thought about it the way she thought about most things that happened at events. Clinically, from the outside, examining it for information. She's a distraction, not the kind of woman any powerful man would choose. The thing that bothered her most, she decided, wasn't the content. She had heard versions of that content before, in different registers, from different directions, for most of her adult life. The thing that bothered her was the easiness of it. The way he said it like he was reading something off a list, like there was a category she fell into, and the category was self-evident and required no examination whatsoever. She had spent 4 years building something. She had slept through her alarm twice in 4 years and had never once been late to a setup. She had crisis-managed a venue fire, a catering collapse, a wedding where the florist had sent the wrong flowers for 300 guests, and a corporate dinner where the keynote speaker had a medical emergency 40 minutes before the event began. She had handled all of it. None of that information was available to Blake Harrison because Blake Harrison had looked at her and arrived at a conclusion and moved on. That was fine. People like that existed. Hannah had learned early that the most useful thing to do with people like that was take their words, examine them for any information that was actually useful, discard the rest, and keep moving. She was not going to let a stranger's careless opinion live rent-free in her head. She was not going to cry about it in her car. She was not going to call her best friend Sonia and report it, because Sonia would get angry on her behalf, and sometimes that anger was useful, and sometimes it just kept the wound open longer. Hannah pulled into her parking spot, sat in the car for a minute and a half, and then went inside and went to sleep. 3 weeks later, she was in a meeting at the Kenmore Hotel, walking a prospective client, a tech startup called Veriton Group, that wanted an end-of-year celebration for 400 people, on a budget that was honest about what it wanted and not particularly realistic about what that bought. Through her service packages, and the door to the private conference room opened. She looked up. A man in a charcoal suit stepped inside. She recognized him from the gala. The second voice. Ethan. He stopped when he saw her. Something moved across his face. Recognition, then something more complicated than recognition. "I'm sorry," he said to the room. "I must have the wrong conference room." Ethan Caldwell? The startup's CEO, a young man named Marcus Park, stood and extended his hand. "You're not in the wrong room. We asked you here. Hannah Whitmore, this is Ethan Caldwell. He's Veriton's lead investor. We thought it would be useful to have him in on the planning conversation." Hannah did not change her expression. She extended her hand. "Mr. Caldwell." His grip was firm without being performative. He held eye contact for 2 seconds longer than a normal handshake, and she understood in those 2 seconds that he knew exactly who she was. "Ms. Whitmore," he said. "I've heard good things about Whitmore events." She pulled her hand back. "From who?" "Claudia Hartley." A beat. "She speaks highly of your work," he said. "Said the gala last month was the best she'd run in 20 years. Hannah turned back to her materials. "That's accurate," she said, and resumed the presentation. The meeting lasted 90 minutes. Ethan Caldwell was quiet for most of it, which was unusual for an investor in Hannah's experience. Investors usually spent client meetings performing their own intelligence. But Ethan sat at the end of the conference table with a legal pad and a pen, and he listened more than he talked, and when he did speak, the questions were specific and useful. He asked about her contingency protocols for vendor failures. She told him. He asked about how she managed timeline compression when a client changed scope late in the planning process. She told him that too, and she was direct about what late scope changes cost and what they required. He nodded and wrote something on his legal pad. After the meeting, Marcus Park walked her to the elevator and confirmed they wanted to move forward. She said she'd have a formal proposal in 48 hours. The elevator doors opened. Ethan Caldwell was standing in the lobby. He looked up when she came out. "Miss Whitmore," he said, "do you have a few minutes?" She looked at him. "I'd like to speak with you privately," he said. "It won't take long. There's a coffee place 2 blocks from here. Or we can stand here if you'd prefer." The lobby of the Kenmore Hotel was not a place where private conversations remained private. 2 blocks, she said. The coffee place was called Carver's, and it was the kind of Chicago spot that had been there since before the neighborhood changed. Old countertops, local roast, no aesthetic ambition whatsoever. Hannah ordered black coffee. Ethan ordered the same. They sat at a table near the window with Chicago gray outside and the coffee coming in ceramic mugs. Ethan Caldwell put both hands around his mug and looked at her. "I want to apologize," he said, "for what happened at the Hartley Gala." Hannah kept her face neutral. "I don't know what you're referring to." "Yes, you do." A pause. She let it sit. "I was standing next to a man who said something about you that was wrong and dismissive and unkind," Ethan said, "and I didn't say enough to stop it. I said it was a significant thing to say, and then I let it go. That wasn't adequate." He kept his eyes on her. "You heard it. I saw you. You saw me finish adjusting the flowers and walk away." "Yes. That's not evidence that I heard anything." "No," he said. "It's not, but I know you heard." She picked up her coffee. "And this is what? Guilt management?" "Probably some of that," he said, without flinching. "I don't like what I did or didn't do that night. I've thought about it a lot since." "That's not my problem." "I know it's not." He said it simply, without defensiveness. "I'm not here asking you to make it your problem. I'm here because it was the right thing to do and I hadn't done it yet." Hannah set her coffee down. She looked at him. Ethan Caldwell was maybe 35. Dark hair going slightly gray at the temples in a way that looked like it had started early. Good face. Not traditionally handsome, but specific, with the kind of eyes that made you think he was holding 3 separate conversations in his head simultaneously. His suit was expensive, and he wore it like he'd forgotten it was on, which was the mark of someone who'd been wearing suits since before he was old enough to have opinions about them. "Who was he?" she said. "His name is Blake Harrison. Harrison Capital." She knew the name. Everyone in Chicago who worked adjacent to Money knew the name. Is he someone I need to know? She said. Professionally? Ethan considered. Probably not. He doesn't tend to need event planners. Then I don't need to know him. No, Ethan agreed. You don't. They drank their coffee. The silence was not uncomfortable, which surprised her. You work with him, she said. We've been partners for about 7 years. We invest in the same vehicles, some joint ventures. And you like him? Ethan thought about that. He's complicated. That's not what I asked. I know. He turned his mug slightly on the table. Most of the time. Yes, he's brilliant and he's difficult and he has a specific way of seeing the world that I don't always agree with. You mean he categorizes people? Ethan looked at her. Yes, that's a good way to put it. And he categorized me. He did. Incorrectly. Very, Ethan said. And there was something in his voice when he said it that was different from the preceding sentences. Something with more weight. Hannah registered that. She didn't comment on it. Your apology is accepted, she said. She picked up her coat from the back of the chair. For what it's worth, I wasn't going to spend time on it. But it's a decent thing, what you did. She stood. I don't give second chances to people who dismiss me, but I don't spend energy on them either. That sounds like an efficient approach to life, Ethan said. It is. She pulled her coat on. I'd like to have dinner with you, he said. She stopped. Not because of the apology, he said, not as compensation, because I've been trying to figure out why I can't stop thinking about the way you walked across that ballroom, and the answer I keep arriving at is that I'd like to know you. He said it straight, no performance in it. If that's not something you're interested in, I'll take the Veriton investment a different direction so it's not professionally awkward. Hannah looked at him for a long moment. You'd move the investment. Yes. To avoid making things uncomfortable for me. Yes. She studied him. Keep the investment where it is, she said, and I'll think about the dinner. No. She thought about it for 6 days. She thought about it while she was meeting with a bride about florals for a spring wedding in Naperville. She thought about it while she was on the phone with a difficult venue coordinator at the Palmer House, negotiating a setup timeline that the venue kept trying to compress. She thought about it at 2 a.m. when she was lying in bed, unable to sleep, because her brain was running the catering calculations for the Veriton event, and also, apparently, running Ethan Caldwell. On the 6th day, she texted him, Friday works. You pick the place. He texted back within 4 minutes. 7 o'clock. I'll send the address. The address he sent was not a restaurant she recognized from the name. When she looked it up, it turned out to be a small Italian place in Wicker Park, with 30 seats and no website presence beyond a simple reservation page and a Yelp listing that had 12 reviews, all from regulars, all saying variations of the same thing. Quiet, excellent. The owner remembers your name. She was 15 minutes early. He was already there. The dinner lasted 3 hours. Hannah had been on enough dates to know within the first 30 minutes whether a person was performing or present, and Ethan Caldwell was present in a way that she found initially suspicious and then, gradually, just true. He did not talk about his money. He did not list his accomplishments. He did not ask her questions, and then immediately redirect the conversation toward himself. He asked about Whitmore events, and he listened to the answer without nodding in the preemptive way people nod when they're waiting for you to stop talking so they can respond. She told him about starting the company. She told him about the first 2 years when she was doing 300-person events while simultaneously trying to build the infrastructure to support 300-person events, which was like trying to build a boat while already at sea. He laughed at that. She told him about the venue fire, the one she'd never told a client about in the years since it happened. A conference dinner where a kitchen malfunction had required her to evacuate 300 people and relocate the entire event to a backup venue across town in under 40 minutes. She'd lost the caterer that night. She'd renegotiated with a restaurant willing to do buffet-style emergency catering while her hands were still shaking. Were you scared? He asked. Terrified, she said. The whole time. But you can't show that. The moment you show that, you've transferred your panic to 299 other people, and then you have a different problem. How do you hold it? You focus on the next thing, only the next thing, not the full scope of the disaster. Just What is the immediate next thing that needs to happen? And then the thing after that. Ethan was quiet for a moment. That's how I do investment decisions, he said. During a market correction, when everyone's looking at the full cliff, I just look at the next foothold. She hadn't expected that parallel. She looked at him. Is that strange? He said. No, she said. It's just, I don't usually find those parallels. You don't usually have dinner with venture capitalists? I don't usually find the parallel. He smiled. They talked about Chicago, the specific texture of this city, the way it rewarded a certain kind of stubbornness, the way it ate people who came here expecting it to give them something. He told her about growing up in Milwaukee, which he'd left at 18 and returned to for holidays, and felt the particular ambivalence of a person toward a place that made them who they are before they knew who they wanted to be. She told him about growing up in Columbus, Ohio, which she had loved as a child and found insufficient as an adult. Not because it was bad, but because she was someone who needed a larger stage and had always known it, even before she could articulate it. That sounds like something you've made peace with, he said. Needing a larger stage? Knowing what you need and going after it. She looked at him. Why wouldn't I have made peace with it? He held her gaze. Most people haven't. She thought about that. I spent a long time, she said, being told, not always explicitly, that what I wanted was too much, that I should want something smaller, something more proportionate. She said the word carefully. I decided a long time ago that I was going to decide for myself what was proportionate. Ethan set down his wine. That night at the gala, he said, the way you walked away. We don't need to discuss that. I know. I'm not discussing it for the reason you think. He looked at her directly. I've been in a lot of rooms where people have been unkind to other people. I've watched people react badly, and I've watched people react well. I've never watched someone absorb something like that and turn it back into the work so completely that you couldn't see the seam. It was... He stopped. It was what? Remarkable, he said. That's the word I keep using, and it doesn't quite fit, but it's the closest I have. Hannah looked at him for a long moment. Something in her chest shifted, not dramatically. She was not a dramatic person, internally, more like a room where someone had moved one piece of furniture and suddenly the light fell differently. It wasn't remarkable, she said finally. It was survival. You do enough of that and it stops feeling like anything. That's exactly what makes it remarkable, he said. She looked away. Outside the restaurant window, Chicago was doing what it did in November. Wind driving rain sideways down the empty street, the light from the restaurant making the wet pavement glow. This is a good restaurant, she said, changing the subject. It is, he said. He didn't push. That, she noted, that he didn't push. They shook hands outside on the sidewalk with the rain still going, which was objectively absurd, and which made both of them laugh at the formality of it. Two adults shaking hands in the rain on a Wicker Park side street at 10 o'clock on a Friday night. Can I call you? He said. You can text, she said. I answer texts. Phone calls have to be scheduled. Noted. She turned to go. Hannah. She turned back. He stood there in the rain looking at her, water darkening the shoulders of his coat. You're going to be fine, he said, and then, quieter. You're going to be more than fine. She didn't know exactly what he meant by that, whether he meant the Veritan event or the company or her life in general. She didn't ask. She nodded once, turned, and walked to her car. She drove home with the radio on this time. Across town, in the penthouse of a building on Michigan Avenue, Blake Harrison was sitting at his desk reviewing term sheets for a deal he was closing in January, and his phone buzzed with a text from Ethan that said, "Had dinner tonight. Just wanted you to know." Blake read it twice. He typed back, "With who?" Ethan's response took 4 minutes. The planner from the Hartley Gala. Blake set the phone face down on his desk. He picked up the term sheet. He put it down. He picked up the phone and read the message again. He did not respond. He sat at his desk for another 20 minutes, not reading the term sheet, and then he poured 2 fingers of scotch and stood at his floor-to-ceiling window and looked at Chicago below him, all that lit-up distance, and felt something he couldn't quite name settle into the room around him like weather coming in. He told himself it was nothing. He told himself he didn't know why it bothered him. Both of those things were lies, and Blake Harrison was not a man who lied to himself often, which made the lies worse. He stood at the window for a long time. Outside, somewhere in the city, a woman with warm blonde curls and a tortoiseshell clip was driving home through the rain, and she had not given him a single thought since the night she walked away from his words without a backward glance. And Blake Harrison, for perhaps the first time in his life, felt the particular cold of being completely and correctly ignored. He wouldn't understand what that feeling meant until it was too late to do anything about it. But that night, standing at his window with his scotch going warm in his hand, something had already started. Something he hadn't chosen. Something that wouldn't stop. The Veriton Group proposal landed in Marcus Park's inbox 47 hours after the Kenmore Hotel meeting, which was 1 hour ahead of the 48-hour window Hannah had promised, because Hannah Whitmore did not deliver things at the last minute and had not done so in 4 years of running her own company. Marcus called her within 20 minutes of receiving it. "This is more detailed than anything we've gotten from the other planners we spoke to," he said. "That's because it is more detailed," Hannah said. She was at her desk in the small office she rented on the 3rd floor of a building in the West Loop, eating a sandwich with one hand and holding her phone with the other. The contingency section on page 7 covers 3 different vendor failure scenarios with alternative sourcing already identified. "That's not standard." "No," Marcus said. "It isn't." "The budget is also honest," she said. "What you asked for is achievable. What you originally told Ethan Caldwell you wanted is not." Page 11 explains why. A pause on Marcus's end. "You told our lead investor his expectations were wrong?" "In writing, with a cost breakdown," Hannah said. "Yes." Another pause, and then Marcus Park laughed. "We'll sign the contract this week." She put the phone down and finished her sandwich and went back to work on the 3 other events she was managing simultaneously, because that was the nature of December. Everyone wanted their year-end celebrations at the same time, in the same venues, using the same caterers, and the entire event planning industry spent November and December in a controlled state of crisis that felt, from the inside, like sprinting on a treadmill someone else was controlling. Ethan texted her on Wednesday. "The Veriton team is very pleased with the proposal. Marcus said you told him the budget was wrong." She typed back, "The budget was wrong." He seemed to like that. People who are serious about outcomes like being told the truth. A pause, then, "Are you free Saturday?" She looked at her calendar. Saturday she had a setup call at 9, a venue walkthrough at noon, and nothing after 2. After 2, she sent back. Museum of Science and Industry, 3 o'clock. She stared at that for a second. "That's not a restaurant," she typed. "No, it isn't." She put her phone down and felt something move through her chest, that same subtle rearrangement of furniture, and went back to the catering contract she'd been reviewing before he texted. The Museum of Science and Industry, on a Saturday afternoon in late November, was full of children and their exhausted parents and school groups moving in loose formations through the exhibits, and Ethan Caldwell was waiting for her near the entrance in a coat that was too light for the weather and holding 2 coffees from a place down the street. "You're underdressed," she said. "I run warm," he said, and handed her one of the coffees. It was the right order. She hadn't told him what she drank. She looked at it. "Claudia Hartley's assistant mentioned it when I called to ask about the catering," he said. "You called Claudia Hartley's assistant?" "I wanted to get it right." She looked at him for a moment, this man who had done due diligence on her coffee order, and then she took the cup and walked inside. They spent 2 hours in the museum, not talking about business, not performing the particular kind of conversation that people have on dates when they're more interested in presenting themselves than actually connecting. They walked through the coal mine exhibit, which was dark and industrial and smelled faintly of something old, and Ethan stood at the information panels for longer than most people did, actually reading them. "You read everything," she said. "I like knowing how things work," he said, "the actual mechanics, not just the result." "Is that how you approach investments?" "That's how I approach everything." They stopped at the submarine. The U-505 German, captured in 1944, sitting in its own climate-controlled gallery like something that had come from another world. They stood in front of it together in the low light, not talking, and Hannah was aware of his shoulder near hers and the specific quality of the quiet between them. "What are you thinking?" he said. I'm thinking about how many decisions went into this thing existing, she said. Every weld, every choice. And then someone else's decisions ended it, captured it, put it here. She paused. Everything is the result of someone's decision. That's either hopeful or terrifying. Both, she said. He looked at her sideways. Both, he agreed. On the drive back, she realized she had not thought about the office for 2 hours, which had not happened on a weekend in longer than she could accurately remember. He texted the following Tuesday, and the Thursday after that. Not long messages. He wasn't a person who performed over text. The messages were short and specific, usually a question or an observation, occasionally a link to something she might find useful or interesting. A review of a restaurant she'd mentioned. An article about event industry trends. Once, inexplicably, a photograph of a very large dog sitting in a very small chair, no caption. She sent back why. He sent, I don't know. It seemed important. She sat at her desk and laughed out loud for the first time in a week. They had dinner again the second Friday of December. The same Italian place in Wicker Park because neither of them suggested changing it and neither of them wanted to. This time she told him about her family. Her mother in Columbus who called every Sunday and asked when Hannah was going to slow down. As if slowness were a destination Hannah was choosing not to drive toward. Her younger sister Becca, who worked in healthcare administration and was married to a man named Derek, who Hannah found adequate and her mother found ideal, which said something about the differences between Hannah and her mother. Ethan listened. He told her about his own family. His father, who had died when Ethan was in college, a sudden cardiac event, the kind of death that doesn't announce itself. He said it without making it the centerpiece of the conversation, just laid it in, matter-of-factly, the way you mention weather. How did that change you? She asked. He thought about it, really thought, the way she'd noticed he did everything, not performing consideration, actually considering. It made me impatient with time, he said, not in a reckless way, just I stopped waiting to decide things. If something mattered, I moved toward it. She held that. Is that what you're doing? She said. He met her eyes. Yes. The word landed simply, without ornamentation. Hannah looked at the table for a moment. I don't do this easily, she said. She stopped. Seen? He offered. I was going to say open, she said, but yes, either. I know, he said. I'm not in a hurry. She looked up at him. You just said you moved toward things. Moving toward isn't the same as rushing, he said. I know the difference. Blake Harrison found out about the second dinner the same way he found out about the first one. Ethan told him directly, with the uncomplicated transparency that had always been one of Ethan's most infuriating qualities. They were in Blake's office on Michigan Avenue on a Monday afternoon, going through projections for a real estate venture they were co-funding in the River North neighborhood. The meeting had been running for 90 minutes and was nearly done when Ethan said, without particular emphasis, I've been seeing Hannah Whitmore. Blake was looking at a spreadsheet. He kept looking at it. Seeing, he said. Yes. As in I'm interested in her and she appears to be interested in me, Ethan said. We've had dinner twice. We went to the museum last weekend. Blake set down his pen. He did it carefully, the way he did everything carefully, which was a habit he'd developed to disguise the speed of his internal reactions. The event planner, he said. Yes. From the Hartley Gala. You remember her, Ethan said. It was not quite a question. Blake picked up his pen again. He made a notation on the projection sheet that he would later realize was completely meaningless. I remember the gala. She's remarkable, Blake. The word landed. Blake kept his eyes on the page. That's a strong word. It's the right word. Ethan leaned back in his chair. He had the relaxed posture of someone who had decided something and was not interested in defending it. She's sharp and honest, and she runs toward hard things instead of away from them. And she doesn't care what I'm worth. Not in the way people usually don't care, performatively. She actually doesn't. He paused. That's unusual. People who don't care what you're worth either have their own money or they're not paying attention. Or they have a solid enough foundation that someone else's money is just information, not power. Ethan looked at him. She's the third kind. Blake said nothing. The office was quiet. 20 stories below, Michigan Avenue moved in its constant, indifferent stream. I said something at the gala, Blake said. You did. She knows it was me. Yes. Blake finally looked up. And she's not seen you, Blake. She's seen me. Ethan said it without heat. What you said doesn't have anything to do with what's happening now. She's not looking for payback, and she's not looking for an apology, and she's not thinking about you. He held Blake's gaze. That's the thing I don't think you've understood yet. Blake looked at him. She heard what you said, Ethan said, and she finished her job and she went home. You don't exist in her ledger as a debt to be settled. You exist in it as irrelevant. The word hit differently than Ethan had probably intended it to, or maybe he'd intended it exactly that way. Ethan was good enough at the truth to use it surgically when he needed to. Blake said, Good! Good for her! He went back to the spreadsheet. Ethan watched him for a moment and then went back to his own copy. The meeting ended 20 minutes later. They shook hands at the elevator the way they always did, the handshake of 15 years of partnership, and Blake rode the elevator back up to his floor and stood at his window and felt the thing he hadn't been able to name since November doing something new in his chest, getting louder. He didn't like it. The Veritan Group event was the 18th of December, and it went off with the kind of smooth, invisible precision that Hannah had delivered enough times to stop being surprised by, though she was never entirely free of the fear, right up until the moment everything was working. 400 people. Navy and gold color scheme. Live jazz quartet. Dinner service for the first 120 at round tables. Standing cocktail format for the remaining 280 in the adjoining hall. 3 stations, 2 bars, 1 photo experience that the tech company had insisted on, and that Hannah had made actually elegant instead of the gimmicky disaster it could have been. Ethan arrived at 7:15. He was not there as a guest. He told her he would stop by briefly because he had another engagement, and he didn't stay long, just long enough to stand near the door and take in the room. She was mid-circuit when she spotted him, clipboard in hand, moving between the 2 halls. He caught her eye across the room. He held up his coffee, not hers, his own, from somewhere outside, in a small salute. She did not break stride, but she nodded once, and something in her chest loosened a fraction, the way it did when someone whose opinion you'd started to value, without quite meaning to, confirmed that the thing you'd built was worth looking at. He left 40 minutes later. He texted from his car. Impeccable, as expected. She read it standing in the service corridor at 8:15 with the party in full swing around her. She typed back, expected is the goal. He sent, for most people. For you, it's the floor. She put her phone in her pocket and went back to work and did not allow herself to think about that message for the rest of the evening, and then went home at 1 a.m. and thought about it for another hour before she could sleep. Christmas came and went. Hannah went to Columbus for 3 days and sat at her mother's kitchen table and ate too much and answered questions about her business and deflected questions about her personal life with the practiced ease of someone who had been deflecting those questions for years. She did not mention Ethan to her mother. It was too early and too unresolved, and she did not want her mother's optimism applied to something still forming. Her mother's optimism had a way of collapsing possibilities into certainties before they were ready, and Hannah needed things to move at their own pace. She texted him from Columbus on Christmas Day. How's Milwaukee? He texted back, cold. My aunt made 7 dishes. How's Columbus? 8 dishes. My mother asked if I was seeing anyone. A pause. Then, what did you say? She looked at the text for a moment. I said I was focused on work, she sent. Another pause. Longer. Fair, he sent. And then, I told my aunt about you. Hannah read that twice. She didn't respond for 10 minutes, and when she did, she typed, what did you tell her? That I'd met someone who doesn't let things land on her the way they land on everyone else. She said that sounded either very strong or very lonely. Hannah sat at her mother's kitchen table with her phone and felt the words move through her like cold water. Both, she typed. I know, he sent back. That's why I told her. January moved the way Chicago January moves, grinding, gray, without mercy. Hannah had 2 events in January and then spent the rest of the month doing administrative work and meeting new clients, and trying not to think about the fact that she was, measurably, thinking about Ethan Caldwell more than she had intended to when this started. She didn't know what to do with that. The feeling was not unfamiliar in its shape. She had been in love before, badly and in ways that had cost her, and she knew the early signs the way you know the early signs of weather, the specific gravity of someone, the way your attention migrated toward them when they weren't in the room. But she also knew what it cost to build something on shaky ground, and she was not willing to do that again. She told Sonia about him on a Saturday in early February, over wine at Sonia's apartment in Andersonville. Sonia was Hannah's oldest friend, small and precise and sharp in a way that she wrapped in warmth so you didn't notice the sharpness, until it had already cut through whatever you were trying to hide. "How long has this been going on?" Sonia said. "Since November. Ish." Ish, Sonia poured more wine. 3 months. Approximately. "And you're just now telling me." "I wasn't sure there was anything to tell." "And now?" Hannah looked at her wine. "Now I think there's something to tell." Sonia looked at her with the look she reserved for the moments when Hannah was being slow about something obvious. "Do you like him?" "Yes." "Does he treat you well?" "Yes." "Like, actually well, not performatively." "Actually well," Hannah said. "He's present, he listens, he's honest in a way that's uncomfortable sometimes, but the honest kind of uncomfortable. The uncomfortable kind that's true," Sonia said. "Yes." "Is he interested in you or in the version of you that's convenient for him?" Hannah thought about it. "He drove 40 minutes to meet me at an event once, just to be there for 20 minutes, and then left for a different engagement. He didn't announce it in advance. He just showed up because he said he wanted to see the thing I'd built." Sonia was quiet. "He's done things like that more than once," Hannah said. "Small things. Things that cost him something and that he doesn't expect credit for." "Hannah," Sonia said. "What?" "That's it. That's the thing. That's what it is." Hannah looked at her. "You already know," Sonia said simply. "You've known for a while. You're just making sure it survives being looked at directly." Hannah picked up her wine. "There's a man," she said, "connected to him. Someone who said something about me before I knew Ethan." She told Sonia about the gala, about the east wall and the flower arrangement and the words she'd heard. Sonia was very still while she listened. "Blake Harrison," Hannah said. "He's Ethan's business partner." "I know that name," Sonia said carefully. "So does everyone. How connected are they?" 15 years, joint ventures, regular contact. Hannah held her glass. "I don't think Blake Harrison is going to be a problem. I think he's someone who said something careless and doesn't think about it anymore, and that's fine. I'm not—" She stopped. "What?" "Ethan told me Blake found out we were seeing each other. In December. He said Blake didn't react much." "Did you ask what not much means?" "No." Sonia looked at her. "Why not?" "Because I didn't want to make Blake Harrison relevant to this by asking questions about him." Sonia considered that. "That's very clean, actually. That's the goal." She drove home that night in the February cold with the heat working at full effort and the radio on and felt something she hadn't let herself feel in a long time. Something in the vicinity of cautious, compound hope. She was almost home when her phone rang through the car speakers. Unknown number. Chicago area code. She almost didn't answer. She answered, "Ms. Whitmore?" A male voice. Not Ethan. Lower. More controlled. "This is Blake Harrison." Hannah's hands were steady on the wheel. "Mr. Harrison," she said. Her voice came out even. "I'd like to meet with you," he said. "At your convenience. I have a professional matter I'd like to discuss." "A professional matter?" "Yes." A pause, barely a beat. "I'm planning an event, a significant one. I was given your name as a recommendation." She drove. The city moved past her windows. February cold and streetlight on wet pavement in the particular dark of a Chicago night. "Who recommended me?" she said. The pause this time was slightly longer. "Ethan," Blake said. Hannah took exactly 3 seconds before she spoke. "I don't take new clients without an initial consultation," she said. "My office can schedule one. I'll have my assistant reach out with availability." "That works." "Good night, Mr. Harrison." She ended the call. She drove the remaining 4 blocks to her apartment without the radio. Parked. sat in the quiet car for a moment. Blake Harrison had just called her. Ethan had given him her number. She picked up her phone and called Ethan. He picked up on the second ring. "Hey, how was Sonia's?" "Blake called me," she said. Silence. "He said you gave him my number," she said. "He said he wants to hire me for an event." More silence, and in the quality of it she heard something she had not heard from Ethan in 3 months of careful, honest interaction. She heard him calculating. "Ethan, I can explain. Did you give him my number?" "Yes." No hesitation on the word itself, just on what came before it. "Hannah, I want to explain the reasoning." "Go ahead." She heard him exhale. "Blake asked me about you," he said, "a few weeks ago. He said he'd been thinking about what he said at the gala and he wanted to, what, apologize?" "He mentioned an apology, yes, and the event is real. He has a foundation dinner in March, 250 people. He asked for a recommendation and I gave him yours because you're the best and because you thought it would be good for me to be in a room with the man who—" She stopped herself. Her voice was completely level. "Ethan, I know how that sounds." "Do you?" "Yes." "Because what it sounds like," Hannah said, still level, still completely controlled, "is that you made a decision about my professional interactions without consulting me, using your relationship with me as a door for someone else to walk through." The silence on his end was very specific, the silence of someone who has realized, midair, that the ground was farther down than they'd calculated. "That's fair," he said quietly. "I'm not asking for fair, I'm asking you to understand what you did." "Hannah, I'll talk to you tomorrow," she said. She ended the call. She sat in the cold car for another minute, then she went inside. She did not throw anything. She did not cry. She sat at her kitchen table in her coat, still cold from outside, and she looked at her hands and she thought about the calculation Ethan had made. The one where he had decided that what Blake Harrison needed, what that situation needed, was an opening, and that the opening was her. Without asking, without warning. She thought about what Sonia had said, about surviving being looked at directly. She thought about 3 months of careful, honest, present attention from a man she had started, quietly, with full awareness of the risk, to trust. And she sat at her kitchen table and felt the specific cold of discovering that trust is never a destination. It is a question that never stops being asked. She slept 4 hours. Not because she was devastated. Hannah Whitmore had been through enough to know the difference between something that broke you and something that bruised you, and she was still doing the assessment, but because her brain would not stop running the conversation in loops, pulling it apart at the seams, examining each thread. Ethan had given Blake her number. He had decided alone that the correct move was to build a bridge between the man who had dismissed her in public and the woman who had chosen, deliberately, to walk away without looking back. And he had built that bridge out of her professional identity, her business, the thing she had spent 4 years constructing with her hands and her nerve and her refusal to accept a smaller version of what she wanted. He had used her work as an instrument of someone else's redemption arc without asking whether she wanted to be part of that arc at all. She got up at 5:45, made coffee, and sat at her kitchen table with her laptop and worked until 7:30 because the work was always there and the work did not require her to feel anything she wasn't ready to feel yet. At 8, she called Ethan. He picked up on the first ring, which told her he had not slept well either. "I want to understand the full picture," she said. No preamble. "Walk me through it. When did Blake come to you? What exactly did he say? And at what point did you decide that giving him my number was something you had the right to do?" She heard him exhale. 2 weeks ago, he said. "We were finishing a meeting. He asked me how things were going with you. I told him well. He was quiet for a minute, and then he said he'd been thinking about the gala. He said he'd been thinking about it for a while." Thinking about it meaning what exactly? "He said what he'd said was wrong, that he'd been—" Ethan paused. He used the word shallow, that his judgment had been shallow, and that he wanted to make it right. "Make it right," Hannah repeated. His words. "And you thought giving him access to me was making it right." "I thought—" He stopped, started again. "The event is real. 250 people, foundation dinner, mid-March. He needs someone, and he needs someone good. I gave him your name because you're the best in the city. I told myself those two things were separate. Were they? Silence. No, he said. Not entirely. I wanted... Another stop. She could hear him being careful with the next words, and she waited because she had learned that Ethan being careful with words usually meant something true was about to come out. I thought if he worked with you, actually worked with you, saw what you do and how you do it, he'd understand what he'd dismissed. Not for your benefit. You don't need his understanding. For his. He paused. For mine, maybe. He's been my partner for 15 years, and I didn't want to carry what happened at the gala between us. I wanted it resolved. Hannah held the phone and looked at her kitchen wall. You wanted your friendship cleaned up, she said. That's exactly what it is, Ethan. You wanted to resolve your own discomfort about what Blake did, and the cleanest path to that resolution ran through me. She kept her voice flat and specific, not cold, not heated, just precise. You used my professional life to fix your personal situation. The silence this time was the longest one. Yes, he said. That's what I did. She appreciated that he didn't try to reframe it. That was something. It was not enough, but it was something. I need a few days, she said. Hannah, I'm not ending this. I'm not telling you we're done. I'm telling you I need a few days to figure out how I feel about what you did, and I need you to not call me while I'm doing that. Okay. Okay. She ended the call. She sat with her coffee going cold and thought about Sonia's words from the night before. You're just making sure it survives being looked at directly. She was looking at it directly now. The question was what she saw. She called Blake Harrison's assistant the following morning and scheduled the consultation for Thursday at 11. Not because she had decided to take the job, because she had decided she wanted to look at the full situation with her own eyes and make her own assessment, and the only way to do that was to be in the room. She told herself that was the reason. She mostly believed it. Blake Harrison's office occupied the top 2 floors of a building on Michigan Avenue that had been designed by someone who understood that power communicated itself through restraint. No ostentatious lobby, no gold fixtures, clean lines, dark wood, high ceilings, the kind of quiet that money bought by eliminating everything that didn't need to be there. His assistant, a composed woman named Claire, who moved with the efficiency of someone who had learned not to waste a single motion, brought Hannah to a conference room with floor-to-ceiling windows looking south over the city. Lake Michigan was a gray slab in the distance. The sky was the particular white of a Chicago February that had given up pretending it might improve. She was 3 minutes early. Blake Harrison was already in the room. He stood when she entered. He was taller than she'd registered from across the Hartley Ballroom. Over 6 feet, broad through the shoulders, the kind of physical presence that arrived before the person did. Dark suit, no tie, which on some men read as casual and on him read as someone who had stopped needing to signal effort. He extended his hand. She shook it, brief, businesslike. Miss Whitmore, thank you for coming. Mr. Harrison. She set her bag on the table and pulled out her tablet and her notebook, the same one she brought to every initial consultation. Tell me about the event. He sat. She sat across from him. Something moved across his face. She caught it at the corner of her attention, a fractional adjustment, something recalibrating. And then it was gone, and he was looking at her with the focused attention of someone accustomed to controlling rooms. The Harrison Foundation annual dinner, he said, March 15th. We've been holding it at the Langham for the past 4 years. 250 guests, mix of foundation donors, civic leadership, a few private sector partners. The foundation funds arts education programs in underfunded schools across the metro area. She made a note. Budget. He named a number. She wrote it down. That's workable, depending on what you want. I want it to be the best one we've done. That's what everyone says. His mouth moved, not quite a smile. What does the best one you've done look like? It depends on what you mean by best. If you mean most visually impressive, that's one conversation. If you mean most functional, event that runs cleanly, guests leave having experienced exactly what you intended them to experience, donor relationships are served, the foundation's mission is visible in the room without being heavy-handed. That's a different conversation. The second one, he said, She looked up from her notes. He held her gaze. That's what I mean. She wrote something on her tablet. The Langham is a good venue, she said. I've worked it 3 times. The kitchen runs slow on the 3rd course if the service captain isn't specifically briefed. She made another note. Are you using their in-house catering or bringing someone in? In-house, but I'm open to alternatives. I have a preferred caterer for foundation-type events. They do a better job of making the food feel like a choice rather than a requirement. She looked at him. Some charity dinners feel like punishment. The food is correct but joyless. Guests tolerate it because they're there for the cause. That's fine, but it's not optimal. No, he said. It isn't. I can fix that. If you want it fixed. That's why you're here. She made 3 more pages of notes. She asked about the donor demographic, the age range, mobility considerations for the space, whether there was a program element, speakers, awards, a live performance component. She asked about the foundation's visual identity, whether there was brand guidance she'd need to work within, or whether she had latitude. He answered every question specifically and without deflection, which she had not entirely expected. The consultation ran 50 minutes. At the end of it, she closed her notebook. I'll have a preliminary proposal to you by end of next week, she said. If the proposal works for you, we move to a formal contract. My terms are non-negotiable on payment structure and scope change protocols. Those are in the proposal. Understood. She stood and picked up her bag. Ms. Whitmore. She looked at him. Blake Harrison sat at the conference table with his hands flat on the surface and his eyes on her, and she watched him do something she had not expected from a man with his particular architecture of certainty. She watched him not know how to start. There's something I want to say, he said. That isn't about the event. You don't need to, she said. I know I don't need to. He held her gaze. I want to. She stood. She did not sit back down, but she stayed. What I said at the Hartley Gala was wrong, he said. I'm not going to qualify that or explain the context because there isn't a context that makes it acceptable. It was a careless, reductive assessment of a person I knew nothing about, and I said it out loud and you heard it. He kept his eyes on her, level. I'm sorry. Hannah looked at him. He did not look away. She had expected, she realized, for this to feel like something. Some release of pressure, some answering of an account. She had heard variations of apologies from difficult people before, and she knew what the hollow ones felt like, and she knew what the real ones felt like. This one felt real. It did not change what had happened. It did not change the specific violence of being reduced to a body in a room by someone who had never once tried to see her as a person. But it was real, and she gave it what it was worth. Thank you, she said. That's it? What else would you like? She said. You apologized. I accepted it. We have a professional arrangement to discuss. That's where we are. He looked at her for a long moment. Most people would want more than that. I'm not most people. She left. Bad. She called Sonia from the car. I met with him, she said. And? He's not who I expected. Bad not expected or interesting not expected? Hannah thought about his hands flat on the table, the way he'd looked when he didn't know how to start. I don't know yet, she said. But she called Ethan that evening. I took the Harrison Foundation meeting, she said. A pause. How did it go? Professionally? Well, he knows what he wants and he can articulate it. The event is legitimate. She let a beat go. He apologized. He told me he was going to. I know you knew, she said. That's part of what I've been sitting with, Ethan. You knew he was going to apologize, and you arranged for me to be in front of him before I knew that was coming. You took my choice away before I had the information I needed to make it. You're right. No defense. That was wrong. Yes, she said. It was. Hannah, are we? I don't know yet, she said. Give me more time. She could hear him on the other end, breathing, holding himself still the way she'd noticed he did when he was managing something difficult. Okay, he said. She put the phone down. She was not ready to tell him that in the days she'd spent thinking, the conclusion she'd kept arriving at was that what he'd done was wrong, but not unrecognizable. That it came from a real place, a need to resolve something that had been sitting badly in him since November. That the mistake was not malice. She was not ready to tell him that yet because she needed him to sit with it longer. She needed him to understand the full weight of it before she let him off the hook. She worked on the Harrison Foundation proposal for a week. It was the most detailed initial proposal she'd ever written, not to impress him, but because the event was complex and she did not do things halfway. She sent it on a Thursday evening. He called Friday morning at 8:15. "I have questions," he said, without identifying himself, as if there had been no gap between the consultation and this moment. She recognized his voice. She had been, she acknowledged to herself, half expecting this call. "Go ahead," she said. He had 6 questions. All of them were sharp and specific and showed he had read every page. He pushed back on the catering substitution. She explained her reasoning. He conceded the point cleanly. He asked about the lighting plan. She walked him through it. He asked about one line in the scope change protocol. "That clause says I'm liable for additional costs if I change the floral order after the cutoff date," he said. "You are," she said. "What's the cutoff date?" 3 weeks before the event. After that point, commitments have been made and changes cost money. My contract protects both of us. "Fair," he said. They went through the remaining questions in 20 minutes. "I'll sign the contract Monday," he said. "My assistant will send it this afternoon." A pause, slightly different from the pauses in the consultation. Something in it she couldn't categorize. "You're very efficient," he said. "That's the job." "It's more than the job," he said. "It's who you are." Hannah held the phone. "Is that relevant to the contract?" she said. Another pause. "No," he said. "I apologize. I'll look for the signed contract Monday." She ended the call. She set the phone on her desk and looked at it for a moment. Blake Harrison was not who she had built in her head since November. He was more complicated than the flat, careless voice from the other side of the flower arrangement. That didn't excuse what he'd said, but it was information. She did not know what to do with the information. She went back to work. The first working meeting for the Harrison Foundation dinner was in the second week of February at Blake's office with his foundation director Miriam, Hannah, and Hannah's assistant Priya. Blake sat in on the first 30 minutes and then excused himself. He stopped at the door. "Ms. Whitmore, you'll have everything you need from our team." "I always make sure of that," she said, not looking up from her notes. She heard something, not quite a sound, more the absence of one, a stillness, and then his footsteps leaving. Miriam, who was in her 50s and had been running the Harrison Foundation for 11 years and had the energy of someone who had stopped tolerating nonsense somewhere around year 3, watched Hannah work for 40 minutes before she said, "He's different when you're in the room." Hannah looked up. "I'm sorry?" "Blake," Miriam said. "He's been different since we started this process." She said it factually, not as a setup, not as a probe. "More careful. He reads the materials ahead of time. He doesn't usually read the materials ahead of time." "That's good," Hannah said, "for the event." Miriam looked at her with the look of a woman who had watched people perform obliviousness before. "Yes," she said, "for the event." Son. Valentine's Day was on a Sunday that year. Hannah spent the morning working and the afternoon at Sonia's, where Sonia's boyfriend Terrence made pasta from scratch, and Hannah ate too much of it, and they watched something forgettable on television. And it was exactly the kind of ordinary, low-pressure afternoon she needed. She got home at 8 and found a small package at her door. No card. Inside, a bag of coffee beans from the roaster in Wicker Park near the Italian restaurant, the specific one, and a handwritten note on plain paper. "I know you don't need this. I know you don't need anything. I just wanted to give you something that was only about you, not about what I did wrong, or what I want to make right." Hannah stood in her doorway holding the bag of coffee. She was outside herself for a moment, watching. A woman standing in her own doorway in the February cold, holding coffee and a note, her face doing something it didn't usually do in places where people could see it. She went inside. She called Ethan. "Hi," she said. "Hi," he said. Careful, not assuming. "I got the coffee." "Okay." "It was the right thing to send," she said. He didn't say anything. She could hear him holding still. "I'm not ready to say everything is resolved," she said, "but I'm ready to say I understand where it came from, and I understand that you understand what you did wrong." She paused. "Are you still in the city?" "Yes." "Come over," she said. "We can talk." I said. He came over. They talked for 2 hours at her kitchen table with the Wicker Park coffee brewing and Chicago doing its February thing outside the windows. He told her more about Blake than he had before, not as an excuse, but because she asked, and he answered honestly. He told her that Blake's precision, the thing that made him so effective and so difficult, came from something specific. A father who had built and lost a business when Blake was 12 and had never recovered the forward momentum of his life. A boyhood spent watching a man he admired shrink inside his own failure. Blake decided at some point that he couldn't afford imprecision, Ethan said, in anything, including people. "That's an explanation," Hannah said. "It's not a justification." "I know," he said. "I'm not offering it as one." She looked at him. "Why are you telling me this now?" "Because you're working with him, and because I think you've already started to see that he's more complicated than what he said at the gala. And I'd rather you have the context from me than figure it out alone and wonder why I withheld it." She studied him across the table. This was the thing about Ethan that kept mattering, the quality of his honesty. It was not comfortable honesty. It was not honesty deployed to make himself look good. It was honesty that occasionally made things harder, offered at the right time, because he had decided that was the standard he was going to hold himself to. "Okay," she said. He looked at her. "Okay?" "Okay," she said again. "We're not back to where we were, but we're moving." She held his gaze. "Don't do anything like that again." "I won't." "I mean it, Ethan. My professional decisions are mine. You don't make them for me." "I know," he said. "I'm sorry." She nodded once. They drank their coffee. Outside, Chicago pressed its February cold against the glass. And inside, two people sat across a kitchen table from each other in the careful process of rebuilding trust after its first fracture. And it was not romantic, and it was not easy, and it was exactly what it needed to be. The trouble started 3 weeks later, and it did not come from the direction Hannah had been watching. She was at the Langham on a Tuesday afternoon in early March for a venue walkthrough with the events coordinator, moving through the ballroom that would hold the Harrison Foundation dinner in 10 days, checking sightlines and outlet placements and the kitchen door clearance that always became an argument on the night of the event. Her phone rang while she was measuring the clearance between the service corridor door and the nearest round table. It was a number she didn't recognize, area code she didn't know. She answered because she always answered numbers she didn't recognize. "Is this Hannah Whitmore?" A woman's voice. Measured. Professional. "Yes." "Who's calling?" "My name is Dana Reese. I'm a journalist with the Chicago Tribune's business desk." A brief pause. "I'm working on a piece about the Harrison Foundation dinner next week. I was hoping to ask you a few questions about your involvement." Hannah stood in the ballroom of the Langham with her measuring tape in her hand. "What kind of piece?" she said. "An investigative piece," Dana Reese said, "about the Harrison Foundation's donor funding structure. There are some questions about where the money comes from and where it goes." Another pause. "I understand you're the event planner for the dinner. I wanted to give you an opportunity to comment before the piece publishes." The ballroom was large and empty, and the sound of the city came through muffled and distant. "When does the piece publish?" Hannah said. "We're targeting next Monday," Dana Reese said, 5 days before the event. 5 days before the event. Hannah stood very still. "I'll need to refer you to my attorney," she said. "Of course. Can I ask, have you had any concerns about the Foundation's financial practices in the course of your work with them?" "Contact my attorney," Hannah said. "I'll get you that information." She ended the call. She stood in the empty ballroom for 30 seconds, completely still. Then she called her attorney, a woman named Patricia Osei, who had been her business counsel since year 2 and who did not panic, ever, which was why Hannah paid her what she paid her. "Pat," she said when she picked up, "I need you right now." She described the call. Patricia listened without interrupting. "Don't speak to her again without me on the line," Patricia said immediately. "Send me everything you have on the Harrison Foundation contract. Everything. Scope of work, payments received, correspondence. It's all in the cloud. I'll share the folder now." "Good. And Hannah," a beat. "If there's something wrong with the Foundation's finances, you need to know that your name is now connected to this event in a very public way. Whatever they've done or haven't done, you're the planner of record." Hannah looked at the ballroom. The tables that weren't there yet. The space where 250 people would stand in 10 days. I know, she said. Call Blake Harrison, Patricia said. Not yet. Hannah, I call him after I know what I'm walking into, she said. I need the full picture first. She ended the call. She sent Patricia the files, and then she stood in the empty ballroom of the Langham Hotel and felt the specific, nauseating sensation of a situation she had not built and did not control beginning to collapse around the edges of everything she had spent 4 years. She had been standing in the empty ballroom for 4 minutes when her phone buzzed again. Ethan. She stared at his name on the screen for 2 full seconds before she answered. Have you talked to Blake today? She said, no greeting. A pause. This morning. Why? A journalist from the Tribune called me. Dana Reese. She's running an investigative piece on the Harrison Foundation's donor funding structure. It publishes Monday. The silence on Ethan's end was the specific silence of someone whose blood pressure had just spiked. Say that again, he said. She said it again, slower, the same words, the same order. She heard him exhale through his nose, a controlled sound, the kind that meant the thing underneath it was not controlled at all. How much did she tell you? Enough to know my name is attached to an event that may be the centerpiece of a public financial scandal in 5 days. She walked to the nearest window and looked out at the gray March street below. Ethan, is there something wrong with the foundation's finances? I don't know. That's not good enough. I know it isn't. His voice was tight. Blake manages the foundation independently from our joint ventures. I have visibility into Harrison Capital, but not the foundation's books. If something is wrong there, I wouldn't necessarily find out, she said. Right now, today. I need to know what I'm standing in the middle of before I decide what to do next. Hannah, today, Ethan. She ended the call. She stood at the window another 30 seconds, and then she called Blake Harrison directly. He picked up on the second ring. Ms. Whitmore, I need to meet with you, she said. Today, not tomorrow, not end of week. Today. A beat. 2. My 4 o'clock is free. I'll be there at 4. She hung up and called Patricia back and told her about the 4 o'clock, and Patricia said she would be on standby by phone during the meeting and that Hannah should text her the moment it ended, and Hannah said she would, and she ended that call and stood in the empty Langham ballroom with her measuring tape still in her hand and her heartbeat doing something loud and specific in her chest. 10 days of work. Contract signed. Deposits paid. Vendors booked. A caterer she had personally negotiated with, a lighting team she had worked with for 3 years, 42 hours of her time already invested in the architecture of an event that was now potentially a detonation device pointed at her professional reputation. She put the measuring tape in her bag. She left the ballroom. She had 4 hours before the meeting. She used all 4 of them. Patricia pulled every public record available on the Harrison Foundation in 3 hours. Nonprofit filings, donor disclosures, the IRS Form 99OHS for the past 6 years. She had a paralegal on it within 20 minutes of Hannah's first call, and by the time Hannah was sitting in the lobby of the Michigan Avenue building at 3:55, Patricia was on the phone delivering the summary. On paper, it's clean, Patricia said. The 99OGs show consistent arts education grants to legitimate recipient schools. The donor list is a mix of individual high net worth contributors and corporate partners. Nothing obviously wrong. Then what is the Tribune looking at? That I don't know. Could be a specific donor relationship. Could be a grant recipient that has its own problems. Could be something in the foundation's administrative cost structure that looks disproportionate at closer examination. A pause. Or it could be nothing. Investigative pieces sometimes run on far less than they promise. And sometimes they run on exactly what they promise, Hannah said. Yes, Patricia said. Get in the room. Find out what he knows. Don't volunteer anything about our research and don't make any decisions before you call me. I know. Hannah, you're the planner of record on this event. If this story runs Monday and the dinner is Saturday, every outlet that picks up the Tribune piece will include your business name. Hannah already knew that. She had known it since the phone call in the ballroom. She just needed to hear it stated plainly one more time so she could carry the full weight of it into the room. I know, she said again. She went upstairs. Blake was standing when she came in. Not performatively. He wasn't at the window doing the powerful man surveys his domain thing. He was standing at the conference table with papers in front of him, and the look of someone who had been trying to sort through something and hadn't finished yet. He looked up when she entered. She saw it immediately. The particular set of a person's jaw when they're managing real worry, not the contained professional management of inconvenience, but actual worry, the kind that lives in the body. "Sit down," she said. He sat. She sat across from him and put her bag on the table and looked at him directly. "Dana Reese from the Tribune called me this afternoon about an investigative piece on the foundation's funding structure. It runs Monday. The dinner is Saturday. You need to tell me everything you know, and you need to tell me right now." Blake's jaw tightened. "How did she get your number?" "I don't know. That's not the relevant question." "When did she call?" 2:15. I called you at 2:45. She kept her eyes on him. "Blake?" He put both hands flat on the table. The same gesture she had noticed in the first consultation. A deliberate physical grounding. "I found out yesterday," he said. Everything in her went very still. "Yesterday," she repeated. "I got a call from a contact at the Tribune, not Reese, someone else, someone I know, who told me the business desk was looking into the foundation." He held her gaze. "I've been trying to determine the scope since yesterday morning." "You knew yesterday," she said, "and you didn't call me." "I was trying to get the full picture before—" "Before what?" The words came out level, but there was something under them, something with edges. "Before you decided whether you needed to tell me? Whether the situation was bad enough to warrant informing the person whose professional name is attached to your event?" "Hannah, no." She stopped herself, took one breath, let it out slow. "Tell me what the piece is about." Blake looked at the papers in front of him. He selected one and pushed it across the table. It was a printout, a donor disclosure form for the foundation's fiscal year 2 years prior. He pointed at a line item near the bottom, a corporate donor. Meridian Group, LLC, $250,000. Hannah looked at it. "What is Meridian Group?" "It's a real estate investment vehicle," Blake said. "Legitimate entity. But—" He stopped. "But one of Meridian's managing partners has been under SEC investigation for the past 18 months for unrelated securities fraud. The investigation isn't public yet. It hasn't been charged. But the Tribune has apparently learned about it and the connection between Meridian and the foundation." He met her eyes. "They're going to write that the Harrison Foundation accepted $250,000 from a company whose managing partner is under federal investigation." Hannah looked at the paper. "Is that true?" she said. "The donation is real. The investigation of the Meridian partner is real. Whether we knew about the investigation when we accepted the donation—" He stopped. "Did you know?" Blake's hands were still flat on the table. "No," he said. "I did not know. The due diligence we ran on Meridian at the time of the donation showed a clean corporate record. The SEC investigation began 4 months after the donation cleared." She looked at him. "Can you prove that?" "Yes." "Then that's what matters," she said. "The story still runs," he said. "They have the donation and the investigation and the connection. Whether we knew or didn't know isn't the headline. The headline is the connection." "I know that." She pulled the paper back toward her and looked at it. "What does your attorney say?" "He's preparing a response. We have until Sunday evening to comment." "And the dinner?" "Saturday." "Are you canceling it?" Blake looked at her. For a moment, just a moment, she saw it. What was underneath the controlled surface, the years of careful construction, the specific cost of watching something you've built absorb damage from a direction you didn't guard against. "I don't want to cancel it," he said. "The foundation's work is real. The schools we fund are real. The kids in those programs—" He stopped. His jaw moved. "Canceling it feels like admitting something we didn't do." "It looks like guilt," she said. "Yes." "Running it looks like arrogance." "Yes." He met her eyes. "That's where I am." Hannah sat back in her chair. She thought about Patricia's words. "Every outlet that picks up the Tribune piece will include your business name." She thought about 4 years of building, 300-person events, a venue fire in under 40 minutes, the Hartley Gala, The Veritan Group dinner. 42 hours on this event already. Her name on the contract. She thought about the kids in the schools. She thought about the specific satisfaction of a man like Blake Harrison finally being proven right about something he hadn't expected to learn was important. She thought about none of that mattering at all if her business became a footnote in a Tribune scandal piece. "I need 24 hours," she said, "to decide whether you're staying on the event." "Yes." He nodded. "That's fair." She stood. "One more question," she said. "Ethan, how much does he know about the Meridian donation?" Blake's eyes changed. A fractional shift, but she caught it. "He didn't know about the investigation," Blake said. "The donation was a foundation decision, separate from our joint ventures." "That's not what I asked." A silence. "He knew about the donation," Blake said. "I mentioned it at the time, as a win for the foundation's fundraising cycle." Hannah picked up her bag. "Ethan told me the foundation's finances were separate from his visibility," she said. "They are, largely." "But he knew about Meridian." Blake said nothing, which was its own answer. Hannah walked out of the conference room. She walked to the elevator, pressed the button, stood with her spine straight and her bag over her shoulder, and her heartbeat doing that loud, specific thing in her chest while she waited for the doors to open. She called Ethan from the elevator. "You knew about the Meridian Group donation," she said when he picked up. A silence that lasted almost 3 full seconds. "Hannah, you told me the foundation's finances were separate from your visibility." "The books are. The day-to-day?" "Did you know about the Meridian donation? Yes or no?" "Yes," he said. "Blake mentioned it 2 years ago as a fundraising milestone." The elevator reached the lobby. The doors opened. She walked through the lobby without looking at anything. "When you found out about the Tribune piece," she said, "did you know the Meridian donation was in the foundation's records?" Another silence. This one shorter, more resigned. "Yes," he said, "and you didn't tell me that when I called you this afternoon. I was trying to figure out the scope." "Stop." She pushed through the building's front door into the March air, cold and sharp and smelling like rain. "Stop using that sentence. You were protecting Blake. You were giving him time to get ahead of it before I knew the full picture. Just like you gave him my number without telling me. Just like you arranged a situation and handed me the parameters after the fact." She stopped on the sidewalk. "Ethan, do you see a pattern?" The silence on his end was the longest one yet. "Yes," he said. Quiet. No deflection. "I have to figure out whether I'm staying on this event," she said. "I have to do that in the next 24 hours, and I have to do it with the information you've now twice failed to give me when I needed it." She paused. "Don't call me tonight." She put her phone in her pocket. She stood on Michigan Avenue with the March wind coming off the lake and her coat not quite enough, and the city moving in its indifferent constant stream around her. She was not going to cry. She was not going to stand on a public sidewalk and let this city see what it felt like to have the ground shift again under something she'd started to trust. She walked to her car. She drove. Patricia met her at her apartment at 7, which was the kind of thing Patricia did that justified every dollar of her retainer. They sat at Hannah's kitchen table, the same table where she and Ethan had drunk Wicker Park coffee in February and rebuilt something she'd thought was sturdy. And Patricia went through the legal exposure clearly and without drama. "If you stay on the event and the story runs Monday as planned, your name appears in a Tribune business piece as the event planner for a foundation under scrutiny," Patricia said. "The framing of that mention depends entirely on how Reese writes it. Could be neutral, could be adjacent to something that reads as damaging." "What's the actual legal exposure?" "Minimal," Patricia said. "You're a contracted vendor, not a foundation officer. You have no financial relationship with Meridian. Your contract with the Harrison Foundation is clean, but legal exposure and reputational exposure are different animals." "I know that." "If you pull out of the event now, you cancel 10 days before, you trigger the breach clause in the contract, which means I forfeit the remaining payment." "Yes." "And you leave the foundation scrambling for a replacement at 10 days' notice, which the Tribune piece will likely mention if they know you were the planner, because it looks like flight from a sinking ship. Which makes me look complicit in something I had nothing to do with." "Potentially. Yes." Hannah looked at her hands on the table. "If I stay," she said, "I run the event, the dinner happens, 300 people, 250. 250. They attend an event that has a Tribune scandal piece running 5 days earlier. What does that room look like? Smaller than planned, Patricia said. Some donors will pull out after Monday. You'll have attrition. And the ones who show up are people who believe in the foundation's actual work, or people who want to be seen supporting Blake Harrison through something difficult. She paused. Or people who made a commitment and keep their commitments. All three, Patricia said. Hannah was quiet for a long moment. Leaving is easier, she said. Yes. Leaving protects me cleanly. More cleanly. But leaving leaves 250 guests without an event they've committed to attending. It leaves a foundation whose actual charitable work... She stopped. The schools are real, Pat. I know. The kids in the programs aren't connected to Meridian Group. No, Patricia said. They aren't. Hannah sat back in her chair. She thought about Blake's hands flat on the table, the thing underneath his face when he said the word kids. She thought about Ethan and the pattern she'd named on the sidewalk, the specific shape of his failure to give her information when she needed it. She thought about herself at 25, starting a company with $4,000 and a laptop, and the absolute refusal to make herself smaller than she was. She thought about the woman Ethan had described to his aunt, someone who doesn't let things land on her the way they land on everyone else. If I stay, she said slowly, I stay on my terms, new terms, in writing, before midnight tonight. Patricia looked at her. I want a supplemental contract, Hannah said. Crisis addendum. If the story runs and donor attrition drops attendance below 150, I retain full payment and the right to withdraw with no breach liability after the event. If Blake's team fails to disclose any additional financial exposure to me within the next 24 hours, same clause activates. Full payment, clean exit, no liability. Patricia was already writing. He'll sign it, Hannah said. He needs me. There isn't another planner in this city who can run this event in 10 days in the middle of a media situation and not make it worse. That's true, Patricia said. Draft it tonight. I want it in Blake's hands by 9 p.m. I'll have it done by 8:30. Hannah nodded. One more thing, she said. Ethan. Patricia waited. He's not part of the professional equation here. But I need you to know that the person I've been closest to in this situation has twice withheld information that affected my professional decisions. She said it factually, without heat. If anything else surfaces that I should have known earlier, anything, I need you to tell me immediately, not after I ask. Always, Patricia said. And I need you to remind me. Hannah stopped. What? Hannah looked at the table, at the grain of the wood, at the ceramic mug ring from the February coffee that hadn't quite washed out. Remind me that I built this alone, she said, before any of this, before Blake or Ethan or the Hartley Gala. I built it by making good decisions under pressure and not apologizing for the space I took up. She looked at Patricia. Remind me that this situation doesn't change that. Patricia held her gaze. You built it alone, she said, and this situation doesn't change that. Hannah nodded once. Send the contract, she said. Bounce. Blake signed it at 10:47 that night. No negotiation, no pushback on the crisis addendum. He signed it, and his assistant sent it back, and Hannah received it at her desk, and printed it and added it to the Harrison Foundation folder, and then sat in her desk chair in the quiet of her apartment and looked at the wall. Her phone had 3 unread texts from Ethan. She did not open them. She thought about what the next 9 days required. The Tribune piece would run Monday. She had until Sunday to verify the caterer's headcount flexibility and build in a 20% attrition buffer into the seating plan. She needed to call the lighting team Tuesday and give them a modified floor setup. She needed to contact each vendor personally and walk them through the situation with enough honesty to keep them committed and enough professionalism to not panic them. She needed to call Dana Reese's editor and request an on-record statement about Whitmore Events' vendor relationship with the foundation, separate from the foundation's financial matters. She needed to do all of that, and she needed to do it while managing the 3 other events she had in various stages of development and without letting any of it show in client-facing interactions. She could do it. She had done harder things in worse circumstances with less information. But at 11:15 that night, sitting alone at her desk with the city quiet outside and the 3 unread texts from Ethan still sitting there unopened on her phone, she felt the compound weight of everything. The professional exposure, the media timeline, the crisis addendum, the pattern she'd named, the specific cost of having started to trust something that had failed her twice in different ways, settle into her body like physical mass. She sat with it. She didn't push it away. She let it be what it was. And then, at 11:22, she opened her laptop and started the modified seating plan. Gos. The Tribune piece ran at 6 a.m. Monday. Hannah read it at 6:04, standing in her kitchen in her pajamas with the Wicker Park coffee in her hand. It was worse than she'd hoped, and better than she'd feared. Dana Reese had written it with precision. The Meridian connection laid out clearly. The SEC investigation contextualized without overstatement. Blake's response quoted in full from his Sunday evening statement. The Harrison Foundation conducted due diligence on all donor relationships at the time of contribution. The Meridian Group donation preceded any known federal investigation of its partners by 4 months. We stand by the integrity of the Foundation's charitable mission and the communities it serves. Hannah's name appeared once. In the 15th paragraph, Whitmore Events, contracted to plan the Foundation's annual dinner scheduled for this Saturday, did not respond to a request for comment. Hannah had not responded to Dana Reese's request for comment because Patricia had advised her not to, and because anything she said would either read as defensive or as distancing herself from the event, and neither framing served her. She read the line again. Did not respond to a request for comment. She put her coffee down. She picked up her phone and called Blake. He answered on the first ring. He had clearly been awake. I read it, she said. So did I. Your statement is good, clear. The 4-month timeline is documented. Extensively, he said. My attorney has everything. Then you're protected legally. The reputational question is what we manage from here. She sat down at her kitchen table. How many donor confirmations have you pulled up this morning? 14 cancellations as of 6:30 out of 250. Yes. That's within the attrition buffer in the addendum. She opened her laptop. I need a confirmed headcount by Wednesday. After Wednesday, if we're still above 150, the event runs exactly as planned. If we're below, we compress the room and reframe the intimacy of the smaller dinner as intentional. We tell the narrative before the narrative tells itself. A silence. You're not walking away, he said. No, she said. I'm not. Another silence, different from the first, something in it she didn't try to name. Why? He said. It was a genuine question. She could hear that it was genuine. She thought about what to say. She thought about the right answer versus the true answer and whether they were the same. Because the work I do is real, she said, and the Foundation's work is real, and I don't abandon real things because the timing is difficult. She paused. And because I decided a long time ago that I don't make myself smaller to avoid discomfort, mine or anyone else's. Silence. I'll send you the updated seating parameters by noon, she said. I need your communications team to hold all media inquiries through Patricia Osai's office until further notice. My name, my firm, they come through Pat, not through your PR. Done. And Blake? Yes. If there's anything else I don't know, she said. Anything. You tell me today. She could hear his breath on the other end. The particular sound of a person sitting with the weight of something they were choosing to carry honestly. There's nothing else, he said. Good. She ended the call. She sat at her kitchen table with the Monday morning light coming gray and thin through the windows and her laptop open to a blank seating document and her phone face up beside her with Ethan's 3 texts still unread. She reached out and turned it face down. She started typing. Wednesday came in cold and clear, the first clear day in a week, and Hannah was at her office at 7, with the headcount spreadsheet open and her phone on the desk when it lit up with a call from Miriam at the Harrison Foundation. We have confirmed 183 attendees, Miriam said, as of this morning, above 150, inside the buffer. The event ran. Good, Hannah said. Send me the updated RSVPs by noon. I'll have the modified floor plan to the Langham by 3. Hannah? A pause. Thank you. For staying. It's my job, Hannah said. No, Miriam said. It's more than that, and I think you know it. Hannah didn't answer that. She ended the call and went back to work. Bundes. At noon on Wednesday, her office door opened. She hadn't buzzed anyone up. She looked at the door. Ethan stood in the doorway. He looked like he hadn't slept well for several days, which was accurate. The gray at his temples looked more pronounced somehow, or maybe it was just the flat noon light coming through her office windows. He was holding nothing. His hands were at his sides. I know you said not to call, he said. I'm not calling. She looked at him. I have 5 minutes, she said. He came in and sat in the chair across from her desk. The client chair, the one nobody she knew personally had ever sat in because she didn't work from this office with people she knew personally. She worked from here with clients, and the chair was the chair for people who came to her with something they needed. Ethan sat in it anyway. I've been thinking about what you said on the sidewalk, he said. The pattern. She waited. You were right, he said. Both times. I made decisions that affected you without bringing you into them. The first time I told myself it was about getting Blake to do something good. The second time I told myself I was getting the full picture before I worried you. He looked at her directly. Both times it was about controlling the information flow so the outcome was what I wanted before you got to weigh in. She said nothing. That's not how I want to be with you, he said. It's not who I think I am, but it's what I did. He held her gaze. I don't have a good explanation. I have an honest one. Go ahead. Blake is 15 years of my professional life. When something threatens him, I default to protecting him before I protect anything else. It's a reflex I didn't know I had until it cost me something I cared about more. He stopped. That's the honest one. Hannah sat back in her chair. She looked at him. The man across her desk was not performing contrition. He was not managing her toward a specific outcome. He was sitting in the client chair with his hands in his lap and his face showing exactly what it was. A person who had discovered an ugly thing about himself and was choosing to say it out loud instead of burying it. The event is Saturday, she said. I know. I don't have room for personal conversations until Sunday. I know that too. After Sunday. She held his gaze. We'll talk after Sunday. Something moved through his expression, not relief exactly, more like the particular quality of a person who has been bracing for something worse and is adjusting to a different kind of news. Okay, he said. He stood. He walked to the door. Ethan. He turned. She looked at him from behind her desk, in her office, in the company she had built by being exactly who she was under conditions that would have compressed a smaller person into someone unrecognizable. The pattern stops, she said. After Sunday. That's the conversation, and the answer has to be real or there's nothing to talk about. He held her gaze. I know, he said. He left. She sat in the quiet office for 30 seconds. Then she picked up her phone and called the Langham's events coordinator and told her the modified headcount and walked her through the compressed floor plan with the same level, specific precision she brought to every conversation that mattered, because this was the work and the work was what she had. And on Saturday, it was going to be... The Langham Ballroom on Saturday evening looked nothing like the Tribune piece. That was the first thing Hannah noticed when she stepped through the service entrance at 4:30 in the afternoon, 9 hours after she'd been awake running final logistics from her kitchen table. It looked like the room she had designed. Not a diminished version of it, not a crisis-managed compromise. The thing itself. She stood in the doorway for 3 seconds and looked at it. 183 seats arranged in rounds of 8. The floor plan compressed toward the center so the empty perimeter read as breathing room rather than absence. Navy linens, gold votives at every setting, clustered in threes rather than the original single-candle plan, which he had changed on Thursday because clustered light in a smaller room created intimacy rather than exposure. The floral arrangements lower than originally specified. She had called the florist at 7 a.m. Wednesday and renegotiated the height, because lower arrangements meant sightlines across the room stayed open, and open sightlines meant a room of 183 felt like a room of people choosing to be present rather than a room that had lost 67. Every adjustment was invisible. That was the job. Marcus, her head server, appeared at her elbow. Kitchen is ready. Chef confirmed the modified count. He actually said... Marcus paused. He said the smaller count makes the plating better. Tell him I said thank you and not to let it go to his head. Marcus disappeared. Hannah did her first walkthrough at 4:45, her second at 5:30, her third at 6:15, 12 minutes before doors opened. She moved through the room with her clipboard and her earpiece, and the particular quality of attention that she had developed over 4 years of doing this. Not frantic, not relaxed, something in between, the specific alertness of a surgeon in the final moments before the first incision. She was checking the placement of the water pitchers on the service stations when she heard the door behind her. She turned. Blake Harrison stood at the ballroom entrance in a dark suit, alone, 40 minutes before his own event began. He looked at the room and then he looked at her. And something moved across his face that she had seen once before. In the consultation, when he'd been trying to find the words for the apology. That same unguarded, momentary exposure. He walked toward her. She waited. He stopped 6 feet away and looked at the room again. Really looked at it. Not the way a host surveys a venue, the way a person looks at something they didn't expect to be as good as it is. You changed the florals, he said, Thursday morning. Lower arrangements open the sightlines. And the seating. Compressed towards center. Smaller rooms feel smaller when they're organized for a larger count. This feels like a choice. He turned and looked at her. It does feel like a choice. That was the goal. He was quiet for a moment. Hannah, he said. He used her name rarely, and when he did, it had weight. I need to say something before tonight starts. She held her clipboard at her side. Go ahead. I knew the Meridian situation was going to surface eventually, he said. Not when, not how, but I knew the investigation existed because I found out about it 6 months ago through a financial contact. I didn't disclose it to Ethan. I didn't disclose it to my board. I made the decision that because the donation predated the investigation, the foundation's exposure was manageable, and I chose to manage it quietly. He looked at her directly. When the Tribune called you, I was not beginning to figure out the situation. I was figuring out how much you already knew. The ballroom was very quiet around them. Hannah's hands were still. You knew, she said. Yes. When you met with me Tuesday, when you told me you found out yesterday. I found out about Reese's call to you yesterday, he said. I knew about the Meridian investigation since September. She looked at him. She thought about the supplemental contract, the crisis addendum, the 48 hours she had spent restructuring an event around a situation that Blake Harrison had known about for 6 months and had chosen to carry alone until it became someone else's problem. Her problem. Her name in the Tribune, her vendors. Her professional reputation adjusted in real time to accommodate a decision he had made without her, and without Ethan, and without his own board. Why are you telling me this now? She said. Her voice was completely level. She had learned a long time ago that the most dangerous version of her was the quiet one. Because you asked me Tuesday if there was anything else, and I said no. He held her gaze. I've been thinking about that for 4 days. About what it cost you to stay on this event without the full picture. And I've been thinking. He stopped, started again. You've been in every room this week making things work that didn't have to be your problem. Without complaint. Without using it. You had the exit clause in the contract and you never looked at it once. He paused. You deserved the truth on Tuesday. I'm giving it to you now because I don't want to stand in this room tonight having let you run it on incomplete information for 1 more hour. Hannah looked at him. She took 1 breath. Does Ethan know? She said. No, I'm going to tell him tonight, after the event. Tell him before, she said. He deserves to know before he walks in here and stands next to you. Blake looked at her. Something in his expression shifted. Not surprise exactly, more like recognition. The look of a man encountering a standard he hadn't set for himself and understanding, for the first time, why it was the right one. Okay, he said. And you're bored, she said. Monday morning. Full disclosure, whatever your attorney advises, the board hears it from you directly. Yes. And the foundation's donor communications go out Sunday, not Monday. Sunday. The people who showed up tonight deserve to hear from you before they read about it somewhere else. My communications team can... Sunday, Blake? He looked at her for a long moment. Sunday, he said. She turned back to the water pitchers. She adjusted the placement of the nearest one by 2 inches. The event starts in 38 minutes, she said. Go call Ethan. She heard him walk away. She stood at the service station with her hand on the water pitcher and her heartbeat doing that loud thing in her chest, and she allowed herself for exactly 5 seconds to feel the full weight of what he'd just told her. 5 seconds. Then she picked up her earpiece and called Marcus and told him to start the pre-service sequence. Ethan arrived at 6:58, 2 minutes before doors opened. Hannah was near the entrance doing final positioning when he came in. She saw him cross the lobby, and she saw in the set of his shoulders and the particular tightness around his mouth that Blake had called him. He looked at her across the lobby. She held his gaze for a moment. Then she turned to greet the first guests coming through the door. The dinner ran 3 hours and 14 minutes. 183 people sat in a room that had been designed for 250 and felt, by the judgment of everyone Hannah observed throughout the evening, like a room that had been designed for exactly this. The catering was the best she had seen from this team. The chef had not been lying about the smaller count improving the plating. The lighting held at the calibrated temperature she'd specified. The program ran 11 minutes short of its scheduled length because the Foundation's executive director had tightened his remarks after the week's events, and the result was something more honest and less ceremonial than the original script. Hannah stayed in motion the entire 3 hours. She watched Blake Harrison work the room. She had seen him in a professional context, the consultations, the meetings, the phone calls, but she had not seen him in a social one. And the man who moved through 183 guests on a Saturday night 10 days after a Tribune piece was different from the man she'd been building in her head since November. He was not performing. That was the thing she noticed. He was not doing the high-functioning social performance that powerful men did at their own events, the managed warmth, the precisely calibrated vulnerability. He was actually present. He stopped and talked to a woman in her 70s who had been donating to the foundation for 11 years. And he listened to her with the quality of attention that meant he was tracking what she was saying rather than waiting for a pause to insert his next sentence. Hannah watched this from across the room while simultaneously directing the dessert service and fielding a question from Marcus about the timing of the program transition. She thought, that's not who he was at the Hartley Gala. She thought, maybe it is. Maybe it was always there, and the other thing, the careless, categorizing voice from the other side of the flower arrangement, was the performance. The armor, the efficiency that 15 years of watching his father shrink had calcified into something that dismissed people before they could disappoint him. She thought, that's not her conclusion to draw. She thought, stop watching him and watch the dessert service. She watched the dessert service. At 9:47, the last guests left. At 10:15, the catering team began breakdown. At 10:50, Hannah did her final walkthrough of the empty room. The Langhams' events coordinator, a woman named Sarah, who had worked with Hannah 3 times and knew not to try to rush this part, walked 2 steps behind her with a checklist. The room was clean. The event had run. Hannah stood in the center of the empty ballroom for a moment with the breakdown happening around her and the low post-event lighting and the specific exhaustion that came not from physical effort but from sustained total attention maintained across 11 hours of consecutive precision. She was tired in her bones. It felt correct. Sarah touched her arm. Hannah, it was beautiful. Thank you, Sarah. I mean it. After the week you had. It was the job, Hannah said. Not dismissively, just true. She picked up her bag. She walked out of the Langham at 11:03. Blake was standing outside, not waiting in the lobby. Outside, on the sidewalk, in the March cold that had gotten serious since sunset. His coat open, his hands in his pockets. He looked like a man who had decided to wait and didn't know how long it would take. Hannah stopped. The event is done, she said. I know. I wanted to. He stopped. I don't have a prepared thing to say. You don't need one. He looked at her. The streetlight made the shadows on his face specific. The line of his jaw, the particular look of a man in his late 30s who had spent a week being wrong about things he'd thought he'd managed correctly. I've been doing something for a long time, he said, that I wasn't fully aware of doing, categorizing, deciding who was worth what before they had the chance to demonstrate anything. He said it without self-pity, just factually. I did it with you. I've been doing it with a lot of people. I did it with the Meridian situation. Decided I could manage the information because I trusted my own assessment over everyone else's need to know. He looked at the sidewalk for a moment. That's not precision, it's arrogance. Hannah listened. I've known Ethan for 15 years, he said. He's the most honest person in my professional life. And I withheld something from him for 6 months because I decided I knew better than he needed to know. He looked up at her. Tonight he told me that was the most... He paused. He used the word isolating, that it was isolating to find out I'd been carrying something that affected him and chosen not to include him. He's right, Hannah said. I know. A beat. You were right, too. The way I've been running people through a filter, whether they're useful, whether they serve the image I'm trying to project, that's not a business strategy. It's a defense mechanism. He held her gaze. What I said at the Hartley Gala, about you, I wasn't describing you. I was describing a category I'd already built before you walked into the room. Hannah looked at him. The March wind moved between them. I know that, she said. I know you know it, he said. That's not who you are. That was never who you were. I want you to know that I understand that now in a different way than I understood it when I apologized in the conference room. She studied him. Blake Harrison, standing on a Chicago sidewalk at 11 o'clock at night with his coat open in the cold, saying true things without asking for anything in return. For what it's worth, she said, what you did tonight, telling me about September before the event started instead of after, that mattered. He was quiet. It would have been easier to tell me after, she said. I couldn't have done anything with it during the event. Telling me before was uncomfortable, and it cost you something, and you did it anyway. She paused. That's not nothing. He looked at her. Is it enough? He said. She considered that. It's a start, she said. What you do with the board Monday, what you do with the donor communication Sunday, what you do with Ethan over the next several months as he figures out what it means that you withheld that from him. Those things will tell you whether it was a start or just a moment. He nodded slowly. You're very clear, he said. I've always been clear, she said. You just weren't listening the first time. Something crossed his face, the ghost of what might have been a real smile, the kind that didn't perform anything. No, he said, I wasn't. A cab moved down the street. The city did its constant thing. Somewhere north of them, the lake was doing what it always did in March, cold and indifferent and permanent. Good night, Blake, she said. Good night, Hannah. She turned and walked to her car. She did not look back. She drove home with the radio off. She parked and sat in the quiet car and looked at the dark street through the windshield for a while, not thinking about anything in particular, letting the night decompress, letting the adrenaline of 11 hours of sustained operation ease out of her body. She was still tired in her bones. She was also, she noticed, something else. Something she hadn't had room to feel all week under the logistics and the contracts and the Tribune piece and the headcount spreadsheet. Something that was not quite triumph and not quite peace, but sat somewhere between them. She had run the event. Not because Blake Harrison deserved it, not to prove a point to a journalist, not to demonstrate anything to anyone who had ever underestimated her, because the work was real. Because 183 people had shown up to a room she built, and the kids in the foundation's programs were real, and quitting at the moment of maximum difficulty was not who she was. She had never been who she was because someone else decided it. She went inside. On Sunday morning at 9:15, she made coffee. Not the Wicker Park beans, those were finished, just the standard grocery store dark roast she always had. And she sat at her kitchen table and called Sonia. It's done, she said when Sonia picked up. The event? The event. The week. All of it. She held her mug. It went well. How well? The room looked like a choice. The food was good. The program ran honest. She paused. Blake told me something before it started that he should have told me on Tuesday. It was too late to do anything with it during the event, but he told me anyway. Sonia was quiet for a moment. What do you make of that? I think he's figuring out who he wants to be, Hannah said. I think he's doing it late, and it's going to cost him things before it gets easier. She picked up her coffee. Not my journey. And Ethan? Sonia said. Hannah looked at the window. The Sunday morning light was thin and white, and the city was doing its quiet Sunday thing outside. I told him we'd talk today, she said. Are you ready? She thought about that. She thought about this pattern she'd named on the sidewalk. The twice withheld information. The twice protected Blake at the cost of not protecting her. She thought about the Valentine's Day coffee and the note that said, "I just wanted to give you something that was only about you." She thought about the museum and the submarine and the way he'd said moving toward isn't the same as rushing. She thought about the hours at her kitchen table in February when they'd rebuilt something after its first fracture, and the quality of that rebuilding, the care of it, the willingness to sit in the hard part. She thought about what trust actually was, not the idea of it, not the word, but the lived practice of it. The daily choice to bring someone information they needed, even when keeping it would be easier. The willingness to be seen when you'd done something wrong. She thought about what she wanted. She had spent a long time knowing what she wanted professionally and being precise about going after it. She had been less precise about the personal version, not because she didn't know, but because the personal version required something the professional version didn't. It required letting someone matter enough to have the power to cost her something. "I think I'm ready," she said. "What are you going to say?" "I don't have a prepared thing," she said. "I'm going to see what's true when I get there." Sonia was quiet. Then, "That's very unlike you." "I know," Hannah said. And something in her chest settled. Not the furniture-moving shift, not the cautious compound hope of February. Something quieter than both of those. Something that had been working its way through the week's wreckage and had come out the other side still standing. She drank her coffee. Ethan rang her buzzer at noon. She let him up. He knocked. She opened the door. He looked like Sunday. The suit gone, dark jeans and a gray sweater, the professional architecture of him set aside. He looked like someone who had slept badly for a week and had stopped trying to hide it. He also looked like himself. "Come in," she said. He came in and she did not direct him to the couch or the kitchen table or anywhere, just let him stand in her entryway and close the door. "Blake told you," she said. "Not a question." "Last night, before the dinner," he looked at her. "He'd been carrying the Meridian thing since September." "I know. I've been thinking about it since he told me." He kept his eyes on her. 6 months. A significant professional disclosure that affected the Foundation's exposure, and by extension affected everything we do together. He paused. "I keep trying to understand how he made the calculation that he could carry that alone." "I think you understand better than you want to," she said. He looked at her. "You withheld things from me twice," she said. "Smaller things, but the same shape. The calculation that you knew better than I needed to know. That you could manage the information and deliver the outcome you wanted before I had the chance to make my own decision." She held his gaze. "Blake did the same thing with you, on a larger scale, for longer." Ethan was quiet. "I'm not saying you're the same," she said. "I'm saying the instinct is the same, the protective mechanism, the decision to keep the circle small and manage the exposure." She paused. "It comes from the same place." "His father's failure," Ethan said quietly. "His father's failure made him need to control every variable," Hannah said. "What made you need to?" The question landed in the quiet apartment. Ethan looked at the floor, then up at her. "My father died while I was in college," he said. "Before I could—" He stopped. "There were things I'd been meaning to say. Conversations I kept thinking we'd have later." He looked at her. "Later didn't come. And I've been—" He stopped again. "Moving toward things," she said softly. "Yes." He met her eyes. "But moving toward and controlling the approach are different. I thought I understood that. I didn't. Not completely." She looked at him. Ethan Caldwell standing in her entryway on a Sunday in March, being honest about the thing underneath the thing, not performing the honesty, doing it, which costs something. "What do you want?" she said. "From this. From me. Say it straight." He looked at her directly. "I want to keep going," he said. "Whatever this is, wherever it's heading, I want to be with you, not managing you or protecting you or building the situation for you in advance, with you. And I want to earn back the part of your trust I damaged." He said it simply. No ornamentation. "That's what I want." She looked at him for a long moment. "I'm not easy," she said. "I know. I don't give third chances. I gave you a second one in February. This is the accounting on that. I know that too." "The pattern stops," she said, "not because I said so. Because you understand why it has to. I understand why it has to, he said. She studied his face. The man in her doorway was not the version she'd constructed when she was still at a safe distance from him. He was more flawed than that version and more specific. He was someone who had loved his father and lost him without resolution and had been sprinting toward things ever since, and sometimes sprinting meant you cut corners you didn't mean to cut. He was also someone who could sit across a kitchen table at midnight and tell the true thing, even when the easier thing was right there. She could work with that. "Come have coffee," she said. Something in his face changed. Not the collapse of relief, but the quieter version of it. The shift of someone who had been holding themselves very still and was learning it was okay to breathe. He came in. She made coffee. They sat at the kitchen table, the same 2 chairs, and they talked. Not about the event or the Tribune or Blake or Meridian. They talked about regular things, about the city, about whether March would ever become spring, about a documentary he'd been watching about deep-sea ecosystems that he said was either the most peaceful thing he'd ever seen or the most terrifying, and he couldn't decide which. "Both," she said. He looked at her. "Both," he agreed. Outside the window, Chicago was doing what it did in early March. Stubborn, cold, refusing to concede anything. It wasn't ready to concede. But the light was different than February. Longer. Coming in at a different angle through her kitchen window and landing on the table between them in a way that meant something was changing, even if the change was slow. Hannah held her coffee mug with both hands and looked at the light on the table. She thought about the ballroom at the Hartley Gala, the east wall, the flower arrangement, the words that had come from the other side of it, and the 4 seconds she had given herself in the service corridor before she went back to work. She thought about how much had been constructed from that one night, the chain of it, Ethan noticing her across the room, the consultation at the Kenmore, the Italian restaurant in Wicker Park, the museum and the submarine, the Valentine's Day coffee and the note, the pattern and the fractures and the rebuilding. She thought about Blake on the sidewalk last night, standing in the cold with his coat open, saying true things. She thought about the Harrison Foundation dinner running clean and beautiful and honest in a room she'd built for $183 instead of $250, and how it had been, she would privately admit, one of the best things she'd produced in 4 years. Difficulty made things better sometimes. Not always. Not automatically. But sometimes the constraint was the thing that forced the quality. She drank her coffee. Ethan was looking out the window, his hands around his own mug, the gray at his temples catching the changed light. He was not perfect. Neither was she. They were 2 people sitting at a kitchen table on a Sunday morning in March who had both done things wrong and said true things and chosen, repeatedly and at some cost, to keep going rather than find an easier version of the same arrangement with someone less complicated. There was something in that, not the romance of it. She was not a person who ran on romance. The reality of it. The specific, unglamorous, trustworthy reality of 2 people who kept showing up for the hard version of a thing instead of the easy version. "Ethan," she said. He looked at her. "Don't do it again," she said. "I won't." "I know you mean that right now," she said. "I'm saying it so when the reflex comes. When something happens and Blake needs something and your first instinct is to manage my information before you bring me in, I need you to hear this conversation in that moment, before you make the move." He held her gaze. "I'll hear it," he said. She nodded. She picked up her coffee. They sat together in the Sunday quiet with the light coming in at its new angle, and outside the city pushed slowly toward spring, and in the kitchen on the table between them the ring of dried coffee from February was still there in the wood, faint but present, the mark of something that had already survived one winter. She didn't need to say anything else. She didn't. 4 months later, Blake Harrison sat across from the Harrison Foundation board and disclosed the full timeline of the Meridian situation. Every date, every decision, every calculation he'd made alone that should have been made together. It cost him. The board required an independent financial audit. 2 major donors withdrew. The Tribune ran a follow-up piece. Blake's attorney managed the process, and Blake managed the process his attorney couldn't manage, which was standing in rooms where people were angry with him and staying in the room until the anger had the full information it needed to become something more useful. Miriam, the foundation director, told him after the board meeting that it was the most honest she'd ever seen him be in 11 years of working together. He said he was working on it. The Harrison Foundation dinner the following year, planned again by Whitmore Events, the contract signed with a revised scope that included a crisis disclosure clause Hannah had drafted herself, ran for 260 guests. Not because the Meridian story went away. It didn't. It was still in the Foundation's history, documented and public and part of the record. But it was also, by then, the story of a man who had held something alone and then stopped holding it alone, and that was a different kind of story than the first one. Hannah did not think about this at the dinner. She thought about the sightlines and the service timing and the temperature of the room. That was the job. Ikit. On a Saturday in late September, Ethan took her to dinner at the Italian place in Wicker Park. The same one, the same 30 seats. The owner, whose name was Carla, said Hannah's name when they came in and brought them to the table by the window without being asked. They ate slowly, the way people eat when they're not in a hurry. The city was doing its early fall thing. The light going gold at the edges, the temperature dropping to something bearable after a long summer, the particular smell of Chicago in September that Hannah had loved since the first fall she'd spent here. After dinner, on the sidewalk, Ethan stopped. He reached into his coat pocket. He held a small box. Hannah looked at it. Then she looked at him. He was not kneeling. He was standing on the sidewalk in front of the Italian restaurant in Wicker Park on a Saturday in September, looking at her the same way he'd looked at her across the Langham ballroom the night she first saw that he was watching her work. Like she was something worth paying attention to, fully and without a category to put her in. "I'm not doing a speech," he said. "You'd find it suspicious." She almost laughed. "I would. I know what you are," he said. "I've known since the Hartley Gala, when I watched you walk across that room and I couldn't figure out what I was watching. I've been figuring it out since." He held the box steady. "I want to keep figuring it out." She looked at him. She thought about all of it. The east wall, and the flower arrangement, and the 4 seconds in the service corridor, the coffee at Carver's, the museum, the Wicker Park coffee and the note, the fractures, the pattern she'd named, the kitchen table conversations in the dark, the Harrison Foundation dinner running clean, the Sunday in March when she'd said, "Don't do it again," and he'd said, "I'll hear it," and she had chosen to believe him. She thought about the specific cost of having chosen well. "Yes," she said. His hands opened the box. The ring was simple. A single stone, nothing excessive, the choice of someone who had known not to overreach. He put it on her finger. The Wicker Park street was quiet around them. No audience. No performance. Just a sidewalk and 2 people and the city doing its September thing, indifferent and perpetual and large enough to hold every version of every story anyone had ever brought to it. Hannah looked at her hand. Then she looked at him. She did not say anything else right then. She didn't need to. They walked back to the car together, and the night was cool and the light was the color of the end of something and the beginning of something else, the way September always was. And she kept her hand in his and the ring on her finger and her eyes on the road ahead, which was lit and specific and entirely her own. The city moved around them, and neither of them looked back.